All right, thank you very much. So my name is Dan Quagliana at Zebra Technologies. I understand this is the last session before lunch, so I'll do my best to keep it energetic and exciting to tide you guys over until we can dive in. So the session's Here Be Dragons, and while it would be fun, we're not talking about dragon like Toothless from How to Train Your Dragon, no Game of Thrones, not even looking at Dracarys versus Smaug from The Hobbit, and my personal favorite dragon from the old Hobbit cartoon, but we're not talking about that. So when we say Here Be Dragons, it's referencing back in medieval times on maps. They used to mark dangerous and unexplored areas with dragons or sea serpents. And when we look at enterprise mobility, particularly with huge adoption of Android from businesses, there's a lot of danger. There's a lot of unknown, as this is something new. So I'm not sure if you guys sat in on the session yesterday that Sean led, but or I think Greg said in the opening, that 65% of business mobile devices are Android today. But businesses aren't really ready for these consumer devices and the adoption. So we're going to walk through some of those challenges. We're going to walk through how to manage that operating system and what's going on with that. We're going to get into the application layer as well. So what can application developers do to help with this security issue? So I did have one obligatory slide about who is Zebra Technologies that I work for. So Zebra, we are focused on enterprise mobility. We do this with Android mobile computers. We focus on helping businesses track their employees, their assets, give better visibility to what's going on. So we use barcodes, RFID, other technology like that. We have a booth right outside the door here, so any questions following the session that I'm not able to answer, please follow up and you can talk to us there. But to give a little background on what do we do, so imagine you go to the hospital, you have a nurse. Nurses now are connected. They have Android devices. They're going to scan your wristband with a barcode so they can make sure everything, all the medication that they give to you, all the records they're taking, any blood they're drawing, it's all attached directly to you. If you go to a retailer, each store associate needs to know exactly what items they have in stock, what sizes, what colors, help you so that you can purchase those devices whenever you want. And when you think of a route delivery driver, they also need to be able to track every package through the entire journey through the supply chain, all the way from when it's manufactured to when it's delivered at your door. And that's the space that Zebra is playing in. And we have been playing in this space for quite some time. So we came out with our first barcode scanner in 1980, and we've had a mobile computer in the market since the mid-90s. So these things, you can see very old, very ancient, whether it was Pocket PC, Palm OS, Windows Mobile, we've had to work across all of these platforms. And in 2012, we launched our first Android device, which was a tablet. And starting that journey, up until where we are now, we've seen dramatic changes. So we're going to walk through some of those and some of the enhancements that we've seen, kind of building off some of the other things that we've heard from the Android enterprise team. But we're also going to look at the challenges that this is bringing to the end user customers. So specifically for us, we used to, for the last 10, 15 years, build devices with Windows Mobile. This was a very niche group. So we had these niche products. You see this one up here. We call those brick on a stick. You have your little handle so you can squeeze a scanner trigger. You have, this essentially, it's almost like a BlackBerry on steroids with a keyboard. So these are the devices that many of these businesses are used to having. You can see a very large number of them deployed just in the last 8 years. So we also had a niche group of developers, so a really small group that focused on this Windows Mobile, Windows CE environment. And then a few years ago, Windows announced that these platforms are going end of sale, end of support, and so all these customers now needed to make a transition. So that was why we launched in Android, and as we all know, Android now is becoming, or is the dominant operating system that businesses and others are needing to adopt. So when we go into our customers, they're used to this niche environment, this niche operating system and types of devices. They've built out a lot of processes for how they manage those devices, how they use those devices. And they're not always as open to change and what's going to happen. So yesterday, Felix Dossman, who is a software lead, talked about the experience he's had building applications in the enterprise. And he said that he has an application he built in 2002 that he deployed to a customer that is still running the exact same way as it was in 2002. And that, unfortunately, is part of the mentality that a lot of enterprises have, that they would have this golden image type of mentality. They buy something and they keep it and they maintain it as is. Well, we all know that that's not the way that the world is working anymore, right? So today in Android, there's over 2 billion devices that are out there. This is a consumer operating system. Android is updating monthly at a minimum with security updates. The security landscape has major vulnerabilities that are disclosed each and every year, whether they have to do with an operating system or not. Last year we saw Blueborn on the Bluetooth stack, and just all sorts of things, covering the wireless, whether it's the processor. So when we look across this and we think of that golden image mentality, we also see that there's an estimated 1 billion Android devices that will never be updated. So how do we rationalize these two worlds? And that's a big part of why we have this dragons, the dangerous, the unknown. So we have these workers where businesses, they have their finances, they have personal identifiable information, all of this that's of huge value to them. And yet we have a consumer platform, we have security issues, and how do we rationalize these two things together? So a few things that we're going to walk through first, just looking at the operating system. So Android Enterprise, there's been a number of sessions already walking through what is Android Enterprise, some of the features. I'm also just going to highlight a little bit on the management side, and then how do we do security lifecycle management as well. So on the Android Enterprise side, in December 2017, there was a Gartner report that analyzed the major mobile operating systems. And this is a big chart, but what you can see is, as you go through, Android, starting in Android 7, really surpassed iOS on the security side. So whether you're looking at the corporate managed security, or even just on the built-in security, a lot more features have been added to Android, particularly through some of these enterprise tool sets that they're building in. So you have a third-party, independent third-party who's showcasing Android as a top security operating system. This is also a nice slide that the Android team built together, and I always find it fascinating that looking all the way back to Lollipop, huge number of features have been added in. So the Managed Play Store is a great tool that now allows enterprises to be able to manage the applications on the device. Specific APIs for EMMs, that some of those were highlighted in the session before this, going to Marshmallow, looking at certificate support. In NuGet, file-based encryption was a huge increase, and Zero Touch in Oreo to help you provision and deploy those devices. So in terms of management, some of the things that we have here, we look a lot at deployment. So within our enterprise customers, you may have someone who's just purchasing one device, but we have customers that are purchasing tens of thousands of devices. So how do you help those tens of thousands of devices get set up quickly and easily and ready for people to be able to use them? So Zero Touch is a great new feature that's come out for Android that we see a lot of people using, leveraging some of the management APIs. And we even have some things where most of our devices have a barcode scanner built in, so you can just simply scan a barcode, take in all those settings, and provision that device easily. In terms of managing that whole fleet, EMMs are a great offering, having the device owner concept as well as work profiles, so you can separate your consumer use cases and apps from that work device. And then also just in terms of the app management, I mentioned the Managed Google Play Store allows you to take apps, whether they are in the public Play Store or not, and be able to distribute and manage those across all these devices. So just a huge amount of improvements, and I think Google Play Protect is another great thing to highlight because there are a huge number of security scans being run constantly through Google Play Protect to help notify people of what's going on. The last thing is the security lifecycle management. So we talked a little bit before about how Android is publishing minimum monthly security updates to make sure that your operating system is up to date. But in the fragmented world of Android, a Google update doesn't always trickle down to the device, to the user, because you have the OEMs who are building the devices in the middle. So in general, most of the OEMs are taking those updates. They have to make updates to work on their platform, and then they roll them out. So that's a challenge and something that needs to be addressed. Another big challenge we see in the enterprise is that there's an expectation that a device will not be used for the typical 2 to 3 years of a consumer device, that it's minimum 5 years and sometimes longer. So how can we address that with Android really only committing to do 3 years of updates within an operating system? And so Zebra launched a program we call Lifeguard for Android. And within Lifeguard for Android, we're directly addressing this. So as we look at the security concerns, we look at those updates being rolled out by Google, and how do we cover that? And that's why we've taken it so that we are then extending an additional 2 years. So we get the security updates from Android, we update that for our devices, and every month we roll those out. There was a study, I think 3 or 4 months ago, that highlighted that a large percentage of OEMs have not been taking all of the Android security updates, and they just do certain blocks and chunks, and not all of them are getting rolled out. And Zebra is committed that we have done every single one of those, and we make sure that our customers are seeing all that security benefit. So I do have one chart that I think is a little helpful to understand how this actually comes out in play when there are security vulnerabilities. So last year, an independent party identified what came to be known as Blueborn. So this was a security vulnerability on the Bluetooth stack. So this was not initially publicly disclosed. A lot of these companies, they disclose them to the operating system manufacturers, and there are rewards that they can receive based on that. So in this case, the company was Armis. They contacted Google back on April 19th. This is in 2017. Google was able to update and patch on August 7th, and they then sent that out to all of their OEMs. A month later, Zebra was able to update and make publicly available September 4th, that patch. And then Armis and people did not publicly disclose the vulnerability until after that on September 12th. So in this case, what you're able to see, for Zebra customers as well as Android customers, is that these security vulnerabilities are discovered, they're addressed, and fixes are available, sometimes even before a public disclosure of what the issue is. So we kind of go through this and we say, oh, so we've got all these great solutions, and so maybe we don't have the danger and the unknowns that we think we do. But in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. So a little bit of a mind puzzle here. But the problem is, as I said, a lot of these enterprises have this golden image mentality. They do not have practices and resources in place to necessarily be updating on a monthly basis all these security profiles. And for them, a lot of this is around being able to test and understand the impact of taking some of these updates. So I mentioned earlier a nurse who's using a device to be able to identify who the patients are. What happens if an update's not thoroughly tested and that system goes down? Now you're looking at patient safety and significant problems around that. For other enterprises, it's a lot more around business going down, losing revenue and money. But this is a very significant issue for companies. Last year alone, Zebra put out 250 updates to our operating system. That's not something that these companies can actually manage. So this is still a challenge. It's an issue out in the market and something that we all need to partner together with our customers to help them understand the importance of the security updates, but also ways to mitigate the risk of enrolling in these updates as well and rolling them out. And so that's what I'm going to dive into a little bit next, some of the things that maybe at the application layer that we can do to simplify that. So when we look at the application layer, there's a lot of best practices that are published out there. John yesterday in his session talked through some of these. So Android has great documentation around best practices. I highly encourage people, go through these. Make sure you're implementing all of them. There's a lot of other best practices published on the web as well. So make sure you're doing the research in terms of how are you architecting and structuring your applications so that you are building in security and doing things in the best possible way. Another great option that Android provides are the safety net APIs. So this was also talked about yesterday by John. I'm not sure if that many people are actually using these today, but they really are of huge benefit. So in attestation, that allows you to verify that the device that's being used is not rooted and doesn't have, kind of like a compromise within the device itself. And when you think of the issue there, so let's say that there's a bank. You're running a bank, or you're writing the application for a bank. You do not want to have your application with people's private information, their access codes and all of that be entered on a rooted device. So you can check and make sure that the device itself is not compromised. Verify Apps goes at the application layer and helps check that there are not any other applications installed on that device that have known security vulnerabilities. So a few just kind of basic checks that we can do. I think another really important thing that we need to focus on as application developers is looking at how we're leveraging third-party libraries. So third-party libraries are really a savior for all of us. They save so much time. They allow us to do a lot more in our applications than what we would normally do. And it's a standard part of building an application today. The problem is, I think many people don't know the libraries as deeply and as well as they could, nor do they always consistently follow and make sure that they're using the latest versions and what's going on. So if you look at some of these quotes here, in Android, a study was done, this is in 2015, and I think third-party library usage has actually increased since then, saying that 60% of the code in Android apps is from third-party libraries. Looking at the third quote here, this is not specific to Android, but just an application usage of open source code, saying only 10 to 20% of the code application developers are doing is their own, with the remaining 80-90% from a third-party library. So these are really major things we need to think about. So going through this, I read through a few different security reports and wanted to just share some of this information that I think highlights the importance of the issue, and then we'll talk through a few kind of best practices of usage of these third-party libraries, and then those of you who are making them, a few tips as well. So Black Duck put out this report earlier this year. So they analyzed, and this is not specific to Android, this is looking at open source usage. So they analyzed 1,100 applications and found just massive amounts of open source components being used. And the scary part here is when you looked at 78% of those code bases had at least one security vulnerability. So when we look at that and the impact and how that trickles down, it gets really dangerous for us. Part of the biggest issue here, though, is when you look at when there are very well-known issues, such as Heartbleed and others, that there's such a high percentage of people still had not addressed these. And one of the big things in this report, they also talked about Apache Structs, which in the United States, that led to one of a company that manages a lot of credit information gave out 150, they lost 150 million users' information. And so this was major publicity, and this study found that 8% of the code bases were still using that and still had that vulnerability within their applications. So these are a big problem, and thankfully the Google and Android team does help address some of those open source issues. And they do that through the App Security Improvement Program. So within this program, when an application is run through Google Play, they're analyzing for 27 different vulnerabilities. And they will reach out and notify you if they identify that you are using one of those vulnerabilities. So they give you 90 days, fix your issue, otherwise they will not accept any updates to your app until you have fixed that, and they also will not allow you to submit any new apps until you've addressed that issue. And it's had major impact. So that's some good news. I read another study that I think is also really interesting, and this one is specific on Android usage, and this came out at the end of last year. So they analyzed 1.3 million Android applications and their usage of over 2 million libraries. And so what they found was that over 70% of those libraries used were significantly outdated. And part of that is because on average, applications within Google Play are updated once a year. And so that means you have an entire year with no updates that you're not looking at how you're using those libraries. And some of the feedback that they heard was that many, 50% of these developers are concerned around when they update a library, what's the impact on their code? That's additional testing they have to do. But what actually ended up playing out was that they were able to do some analysis of this and found that 86% of those libraries, if they updated one version to address a security issue, it would have no impact on functionality. Meaning, if the application developers simply compiled and used the newer version of the library, the application would have worked fine. And then as we look back, you can see the bottom number here, nearly 20,000 of the apps. Many had been notified through that Android security improvement, or the App Security Improvement Program, and they had not made any changes to those applications. So, what are the big takeaways here? I think for a developer, you really need to make sure you truly understand those libraries that you're using. You need to make sure that whether they have certain vulnerabilities in them, and understand also, how often are they updating them? So make sure that they are responsive and that you can count on that. You need to make sure that, a lot of this, it's reliant on us, the developer, to know when those updates come out. There's usually not a notification system for you to be aware of that. So that's something we need to factor in. We also, one of the things that really has come out as a best practice is when you are making an update for a security reason, keep it focused on that security patch. And when you do a focused update, that allows your end customers to feel more comfortable about accepting that. And this ties in with third-party library usage as well for developers, that when you're doing updates, if you're able to just do that patch level, that helps people feel more comfortable with that update. I think the other part that we talked about, how do we address that maybe unwillingness or too much challenge for the customers to be updating their applications? We really need to partner with our customers. When we're rolling out, have those conversations that in this world, we need to have regular updates of the application. And work through how they can do that. What are some easy methods for them to test so that you can understand what their use cases are? The application developer can do some of that testing, the end user can do some of it, and work out some of those shared responsibilities. When we look at the third-party library developers, a lot of this also, you need to have a commitment that if you're publishing something with the expectation that people are using it, you need to regularly update that. You need to be monitoring when there are security vulnerabilities and issues to address that. And then also make sure you're documenting everything clearly. Help make sure people know what you're including. And even reading through some of these studies, whether you're making a major version number change, minor version number change, people look into that. They read a lot into it. If there's a major version number change, people are less likely to adopt because they assume that there will be major impact of how they're using it. So just be very conscious of those things. So that was the main part of the talk here, and I think you heard that there's still some uncertainty within this world in the enterprise and using Android, but there's also ways that we can mitigate that. So by working together with our library developers, with the application developers, and with the Android team and our end users, we can really help create a more secure landscape to improve this whole security system together. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you. So my take